Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're looking at some very interesting rifles. These are pre-ban imports from China. Now, you go back to the early 80s, well, I probably would say late 80s. Towards the early 80s, the only AK-type rifle that was imported in the U.S. was the Mahdi. And those of you who are familiar with the original movie Red Dawn, the rifles that the Russians and the Cubans used in there, those were actual Egyptian Mahdi rifles. It wasn't probably until the late 80s where you saw the first rifles coming in from China. Now, if you look at what the cost was back then, the original Mahdi's were extremely expensive. We're talking nearly $1,000, if I recall. They were very, very expensive, but they were fairly rare. When China started importing the Norinco type rifles, the rifles that you're seeing here, the price came down dramatically. It was probably around $298 or so for a Type-56, which we see here, full stock, and the Type-56S1 that you see here. But first, we're going to have a little bit of a story. This particular rifle here is mine. This rifle here, I want to thank Dave. He works a lot with Henry over at 9-Hole Review for letting us borrow this Type-56S. But the S1 here has some sentimental to it. It's mine. Now, back around 1988 or so, the gentleman who I got to fire an AR-15 for the first time, which it took me almost 20 years, but I finally got that rifle that I shot to start off my career. This came from him as well. I can remember around... probably in the summer of 1988 or so, going over visiting my buddy, and he enters the door and he's got this thing with the bayonet on it and the stock pulled and everything. I'm like, what the hell do you have that for? I mean, you've already got that SP1. Why would you want anything else? But my buddy was also a big SKS fan. He was more fond of SKSs than he was probably even in the AR. So I remember the day that that he got this, and throughout the last couple of years there, I shot it quite a bit. And it wasn't until probably 10 or 12 years or 15 years later or so that I was able to finally get it from him. And the only reason why I really got it from him was because the year after he bought this one, he bought a Polytech. He bought a Polytech with the side-folding stock. And it was a Polytech Legend, meaning it was the milled receiver instead of the stamped receiver. And he was extremely fond of that. In fact, I do remember him restaining the pistol grip and the handguards. I used to make it really look nice. It was like a deep brown type color, really, really nice. So I just had always liked this rifle because of the fact that it was not one of those ones that the first ones that I fired. So that's just a little story time of where this one came from. Beginning importation around 1983 by Cyclo Sports, these rifles came in for $279 for this one, and I think it was an additional $10 or so for the underfolder stock. And one of the things that was so appealing about these rifles, too, well, first, it made it so it was very affordable for an American to have an AK-type rifle. And two was not only did China import rifles, they also imported ammunition. And the ammunition was incredibly cheap. You could take an SKS, at the time even the SKSs, you could buy a Chinaman SKS for around $98 to $100. They were very, very inexpensive. You'd be able to buy 1,000 rounds for under $100, around $94, $95 of Chinese ammunition. Most of this ammunition was old war stock. It came in sealed ammo tins, and it was mostly the copper wash steel, and it was armor piercing, and it also was corrosive. So you definitely had to clean the rifles after you used it. Then as a little bit of time went on, probably towards the early 90s or so, commercial ammunition started coming in. They were in Norinco boxes that were white, or they were green and white. And most of them were standard steel-jacketed armor piercing, or you could also find eventually a steel-jacketed bullet without the hardened core in it. Some of it was corrosive, some of it wasn't, so you never really knew. Fortunately, all these Chinese rifles had the chrome-plated bores and chambers, so it didn't really matter too much, but you did have occasion where you would have the bolt that would rush shut. You may have to knock it back or so if you didn't maintain it. Now, the first rifles that came in, such as this one here, this was certainly one of the first ones, again, around 88. This is before you actually would see the term Norinco on the sides. However, they still were made by Norinco. Now, Norinco was an exporter. It was not a manufacturer. All the rifles that ever came out of China were all manufactured at government-run arsenals. So basically, Norinco was just an exporter from all these different government arsenals. These rifles were all manufactured in Chinese arsenals, military arsenals. The primary ones was Arsenal 366, Hailong Jing, Providence. And then you also had the Polytechs, which were manufactured in Factory 416, located in Shandong Province. Later Arsenal 386 in Fujun Province. These were all better quality, supposedly, than the standard early Norinco rifles. However, I do have to say, when you look at these rifles I have on this table, both which are pre-ban rifles, these are extremely well-made rifles. These weren't the cheaper Mac 90s that were manufactured for the commercial market. Basically, what you're seeing here are actual military-grade AKMs, AKSs that were manufactured to military standards, just with a standard trigger instead of a selective fire trigger. There is no wobbling. There is nothing. There's no movable, no parts that are making any rattling at all. The quality is very incredible on these. These were very well worth money back then. It appeared as though that once the ban came in 1994, and of course then the importation ban came, those rifles that were manufactured at that time with thumbhole stocks and so forth, these are rifles that were manufactured specifically for the commercial market. You notice the very strange thumbhole stocks to make them ban compliant. And you also notice no bayonet lug, no threaded barrel. The quality just wasn't there. These are no longer made the same way. These were specifically made for commercial market, which I do think they cut a lot of corners when they manufactured them. So another model you want to talk about is called Polytech. Polytech was basically known as the Cadillac of the AK rifles. And basically what they were extremely well made. A lot of attention to detail went into them. They were very nice, very nice wood, very nice finish. They generally had a spike, underfolding spike bayonet on them. And then you have what was referred to as the Polytech Legend. The Polytech Legend was the first time they were not made to military standards. In fact, I won't say not made to military standards, they were made to a very old standard, because the AKs that were being imported prior to the Polytech Legend were all what you see here. They were the stamped lower receivers. The Polytech Legend were milled receivers. They started off with a large piece of steel. They were basically like the early AK-47s, AK-48s, AK-49s. They were manufactured of the solid steel because the Chinese, at the same time as the Russians, they didn't have the ability to reliably rivet these receivers into place, so there was problems with them coming apart. So that problem was gone a long time ago. They brought back those receivers for the Polytech Legend. Now, they weren't the only ones. You could still get them from Arsenal. Arsenal manufactured them. At that time, Israel made their Galils with the milled receivers. You had the Valmets out of Finland that used those receivers, but they were very, very rare because they were heavy. But some people just liked, or some countries just liked, the durability that that it offered. Now, the Polytechs were a little more expensive. As I said, these are around $289, $299. You're generally looking around $350 to $400 for a Polytech Legend. And they were mostly the early Vietnam era types, the earlier ones that you would have seen in the early part of the Vietnam War, even the later part of the Vietnam War. Most of the rifles that went were generally milled receivers, but you did see some stamped later on in the war. You basically had 5 or so models of AKs that were imported. Now, the first Type-56Ss that came into the country were utilizing polymer stocks, polymer foregrips, polymer pistol grips, polymer stock assemblies. It was a reddish color, very much similar to the color you see here on this magazine. This is a synthetic type magazine that was manufactured in Arsenal 66, same place where these rifles were, in a Bakelite. Instead of having the orangish color of the Soviet ones, it had more of a brownish color. So the first one you had was the Type-56S, which is what you see here. And this is a basic rendition of an AKM type rifle utilizing a stamped receiver. Now, we're going to go over in a few minutes here the differences between the Chinese stamped rifle versus the AKM Soviet rifle, because there are a lot of changes, but we're going to go over that in a minute. So we have the Type-56S full stock model. Then you have the 56S1, which was a standard MP40 style underfolding stock. Very, very popular model. I have to say these are not the most comfortable to shoot because of the way your face sticks onto this piece of steel. A lot of people have taken paracord and they wrapped it around to make it a lot more comfortable. Then we had the model 56S2. What that was this basic rifle, instead of an underfolding stock, it had a side folding stock. The 56S3 was very similar to the 56S, but instead of it having wooden stocks, it had polymer stocks. And then the final one that was offered was the model 56S-5, and that utilized a match barrel. It was a heavier 20, I believe it was a 20 or 22-inch barrel. So basically what you're seeing with the 56S series, you're basically seeing the exact same rifle with different stock configurations and different furniture. What we're looking at here is basically a Soviet-style AKM. This particular one is a Wasser type receiver. It doesn't have the indentation here to hold the magazine in place. However, there's no issue. This magazine is not loose by no means. But this, for all intents and purposes, is a Soviet-made rifle. They're manufactured off of the same machines and the same prints as the Soviet rifles. But again, this is the type AKM with amp receiver. Starting with the furniture, looking in the rear, you'll see that we're using a laminate wood here versus a hardwood you see here. You'll also notice a difference in the shape of the stock. This is a longer profile here, much straighter. And when you look at the The Chinese, you'll see it's got a much shorter hump to it. Coming forward, you'll see on the Chinese, you'll see a wooden pistol grip, and on the AKM, you'll see more of a synthetic type pistol grip. Now, when you look at the finish on them, the Chinese rifles have like a bluish finish to it, more of a standard type bluing, where you'll see on the Soviets more of a parkerized or a black paint type material on it. You'll also notice differences in the way that the trunnion is riveted in place here. You have two rivets right here, and also the trunnion. If you locate the trunnion on here, you'll see how that trunion's straight across. And when you look at the Soviet, you'll see how it's on an angle. The rear sights on the AKM Soviet goes up to 1,000 meters. On the Chinese, it only goes up to 600. When we take a look at the grips, you notice that there is a swell on the grip. This is also laminate, and there is no guard, which you have on the back. So if you look at the Chinese rifle, you'll see there's an end cap that goes on the stock, on the rear of that stock, so it fits into the rifle. So the parts are not interchangeable. Again, top of the gas block, as you would see here, you have a laminate here, and you have the same kind of hardwood here. Now, looking forward, the early Soviet rifles and the Chinese barrels were pretty much the same. They were standard cut barrels. As you see the Soviets right now, or the Russians right now, they're utilizing cold hammer forged barrels. The barrels were always chrome lined. Now, you start looking at the top here, you have the gas block. If you look at the Chinese, this is a rendition of the early AK-47, where you had the gas vents that were on the gas tube itself. When you look at the Soviet, there's radials on the gas block itself, so your gas vents from the gas block and not the gas tube. You also notice the front sight base located on the Soviet AKM. You notice that it's a much smaller, a much lighter profile versus the Chinese. And another thing that you'll notice is the ears are open on the top here, where it's enclosed on the top of the Chinese rifle. Both of them will have the rudimentary slanted muzzle brake. Both of them will have the cleaner underneath. Both of them will have the bayonet lug. But another thing that we will notice is the way the sling is mounted. If we look on the side of the Soviet one, we'll see that the sling mounting point is part of the end cap of the lower handguard. Not so with the Chinese. On the Chinese, you'll see we have a separate part here that the sling is adapted to. Now, something else that's noticed on the inside, we're not going to notice with these because these are semi-automatic only. Because of the lighter weight on the Soviet rifle, they put a decelerator in the trigger mechanism to slow down the release of the hammer to try to give the bolt more time to lock so it would prevent bolt carrier bounce. You'll also notice the receiver cover. The receiver cover on the Chinese is basically the exact same as it's been on the AK-47, which is a smooth receiver cover. The AKM is now also a stamped material that has ribs on it to make it reinforced and make it stronger. That's the other thing that was not carried over from the Soviet to the Chinese. Overall, the Chinese rifle is a hybrid between the original AK-47 and the AKM. Unlike the Soviets, when they changed their rifle, they changed all those components on the AKM or modernized AK. The Chinese decided they wanted to keep a lot of their parts compatible between their older models and their newer models. For instance, as we said, the receiver covers, the gas tube, the front sight base, the handguards, the trigger mechanism, all that is the original AK-47 put into a lighter weight stamped sheet metal receiver. As I said earlier, the Chinese models were very well received. They were purchased quite a bit, and it took a little bit of time for the cartridge to catch on in the United States. Prior to the importation of the Mahdi rifles, there were no AKs in the country. There was quite a few SKSs that were brought back from U.S. servicemen in Vietnam as war trophies. And the ammunition really was not manufactured in the United States. After these rifles started coming in, some of the manufacturers in the United States started manufacturing ammunition. Of course, this ammunition was not the steel case and steel jacketed bullets. It was brass, full metal jackets. You had hunting cartridges that were soft point. So the ammunition started becoming more available here in the U.S. And as of now, you can see Federal, Winchester, and Remington are manufacturing it. But unfortunately, due to the assault weapon ban and the importation ban that was part of it, this particular style rifle, this particular model rifle, was used in the first school shooting that we were ever made aware of. That was the Stockton schoolyard shooting around 1988 or 89, I think it was. And unfortunately, Mr. Patrick Purdy used this rifle. And that was the first time that these rifles were ever brought into the media as they're being there. unless you were really an avid gun person, you didn't even know these rifles existed, that you could buy them. It was really the media that publicized that you could actually buy these rifles, and what caused the spark of the first major purchase and major rush for citizens to buy these rifles, because they were afraid they were going to be banned. So, yeah, this rifle has some of that history with it as well, as being the first one that was ever used in one of those shootings. And so there we are where we're at now. Multiple school shootings and media coverage and the controversy over whether we should have these rifles or not. That's more of the political line. We're not really going to get into that, but I just want to let you know that there was some of the earlier history of these. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to the range and we're going to shoot my Chinaman here that I have not shot in probably 10, 15 years. The rifle, as I remembered, it shot 100% reliable. I had Remington ammunition and I had Wolf, both which worked beautifully. And I didn't really shoot for accuracy. I was shooting at 50 yards, and I probably maintained a 2.5 inch group. Again, it was limited to my eyes, but rifle worked beautifully. I was lucky enough to have Henry out there from 9-Hole Review, and he brought out several guns for us to shoot. This was one of them, so it was just lucky that he had this one. I was glad to be able to show you the original model too. I have to say, going back all those years, if I was buying this rifle, I probably would have bought the 56S, not the 56S1. But this just happened to be the one that I had first shot, and I've been having a lot of those sentimental feelings of guns recently. The ones that some of the first guns that I shot that I may have gotten rid of that I regretted. Unfortunately, with my buddy here, he's been very gracious to me. He's let me buy this one. He let me get my SP1 from him, and he also let me get my original Glock I bought when I was 21 from him as well. So, fortunately, I've been able to get some of my old stuff back. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, even better, share, and please consider supporting us on our Patreon.